Hey guys, so this is your actual practice slide project that you can work on in a group. I say groups of 3 or fewer. And I'm just recording it so that way, in case anyone happens to be out, or if you want to review some of the explanations and directions, it might make things a little bit easier for you. We've had a lot of sicknesses too. So here we go. To start off with, obviously, this whole week we're focusing on our food webs and our energy transfer. So on the first slide here, you're seeing lots of arrows. Just remember that the direction of the arrow is super important. You are always supposed to show the arrow pointing in the direction that the energy is going to flow. Okay. So, for example, on here, when we're looking at the bunny and the arrow's pointing to the eagle, you can look at it in 2 different ways. The bunny is going into the mouth of the eagle, right? They're being eaten by him. So, they're going into that mouth. That's the direction of the arrow. You're also saying that the energy that the bunny has is going into the eagle. That's the direction of the energy. So we started with the plant having 100% energy from the sun, then going to the bunny, then going into the eagle. So that's the reason for the arrow direction. Make sure that your directions are correct. The other thing over here, label each organism as a producer, primary, secondary, tertiary, or quaternary consumer. Um, Remember, some will be more than one, right? Because they're obviously a part of multiple chains. So, meaning that they could be a secondary consumer in one food chain and a tertiary in another. So, you'll see that more as you go along. But so that's where the P, primary, or P for producer, um, the number 1 would be for your primary, your first consumer, 2 for secondary consumer, a 3 for tertiary consumer. So those are the numbers that you want to be able to use. The P, if something is labeled with a P, it's your producer. Okay. And then for all the rest, they're all consumers of some sort. Are they the first consumer, the second consumer, third consumer, fourth consumer? So that's how you're going to label them. Okay. So that's what the 1s and the P's and the 2s and the 3s all mean. Okay. The O, C, and H, omnivore, carnivore, and herbivore. So that's where this part is in case you forget, right? And then this part, the A, the HE, these are your autotrophs and heterotrophs, right? So these are all click and draggable on yours. I'm in presentation mode, so I can't, but you're actually just going through with your team and sliding these over next to each organism on the food web to correctly label them. And again, remember, some of these organisms are going to have more than one label next to them, okay, depending on which food chain you're specifically looking at, okay? So, for example, if we're talking about the frog, right? Sometimes the frog is, or even let's do the bird, right? If we're looking at the bird in this food chain, the bird is literally going from the plant to the bird to the eagle, right? That's it. Okay. That's a very quick energy chain. Whereas if you're looking at this, you're seeing that it's the plant going to the butterfly, and then the butterfly's energy going to the bird and then to the eagle. So that's a whole different step. So that bird's going to get a couple different labels. Okay. So again, everything's over here. If you can't remember what they stand for, everything's written on top. Don't forget that some of them will have more than one label. Okay. Next part, answer the questions below based on the food web above. When they say above, they mean this guy. Okay. So when you're answering this, they are based off of this food web. Okay. For the multiple choice questions, move the circle. So you're going to slide it around to the correct answer. Okay. So list all the secondary consumers in this food web. And by this food web, they mean this one. Secondary consumers, you're going to list all of them. Which of these organisms are in a trophic level that receives a higher percentage of the energy captured by the producers than the percentage received by the frog? So, what they mean by that with your trophic levels, if you remember, each time you go up in a food chain, right, or in a trophic level, you're getting 10% less and 10% of that and 10% of that. So, when you're looking at the frog, right, when you're looking at the frog here, okay, which one of these organisms are in a trophic level that receives a higher percentage of energy captured by the producers. So they get more energy than the frog. Okay, so out of all these guys on here, which organisms get a higher amount of or a higher percentage of energy than this little annoyed dude right here? Okay, that's what they mean by that. So you're going to go through and you're going to analyze each one of these organisms and say, based on where it's in the food web, is it getting more or less energy than the frog? Okay. And then which of these organisms so that's where you're going to circle those, right? So then which population of organisms will increase as a result of a disease that killed all the snakes? So going back here, if we killed all the snakes, right, which population will increase as a result of that? So looking at these 4 choices, right, you're going to look at your food web and determine which one of those would actually increase in population. There would be more of them if the snakes died off. Okay. Here's the next round. It's the exact same thing, you guys. It just happens to be in an aquatic ecosystem instead. Okay, so again, the P represents producers. And then the 1, 2, 3, and 4 is just the level of consumer that they are in the food web. Carnivore, omnivore, herbivore. Okay, and then autotroph and heterotroph. If you can't remember those, carnivore, you're a meat eater, correct? Omnivore, you're eating both plants and meat. And an herbivore is just your plants. Okay. And an autotroph, think of automatically, right? Autotroph means that you are creating your own energy all by yourself. You do not need to consume anything in order to gain that energy. Okay. So that's where those come in. So you're doing the exact same thing here. And then answer the questions above. Can an organism be a secondary and a tertiary consumer? Which organisms fall under this category? So we're looking for secondary and tertiary consumer. So looking at this, you guys need to be able to identify that, right? So which organism or organisms fall under this category? That they're both. Okay. If an organism is removed from the food web, it can cause instability, not stable, right? It's a bad thing. Which organisms, if removed, would cause the most harm to this ecosystem and why? So you're looking at that and you guys are going to talk about it. Which one of these guys on here, if we took it away, would cause the most harm to the ecosystem and why? And your why cannot be that it would kill everything off. You need to be specific. If you're going to say it kills everything, why? This would die off because you're explaining in detail. You're showing that 6th grade proof rather than just that blanket statement. Okay. And which organisms are a direct source of energy for the secondary consumers? A direct source of energy for the secondary consumers. So, what does that mean? If you're their source of energy for a secondary consumer, what does that mean you're doing? You are their source of energy. Okay. Here's the next slide. Create a food web given these organisms. Make sure the arrows are pointing in the correct direction. Add the arrows, clicking the select line tool and choosing an arrow. Okay, so you guys are going to be able to create your own food web. Remember, it's not a food chain. That is huge. We're asking for a food web, not a food chain. Okay. Remember, if you have a web, you are showing a multitude of menu options, basically, right? So you're not just saying that one thing eats one thing, which eats one thing. They actually have multiple things that they can eat. Okay. So there's options there, correct? So you have multiple arrows from one organism. It's not just a direct line. Okay, so make sure you're doing a food web. Here we go. Explain how the organisms in this ecosystem compete for resources. In your explanation, make sure to include the organisms that compete for the same food source. So, what are they if they're competing with one another? The role of organisms in the desert food web, and what would happen if that food source population decreased. Okay, let's look at that again. All right, so we're trying to figure out what competes with what. Competition means they both want to eat the same thing. Okay, so they're going to have to compete with one another to try to get that food. So the first thing is just what are the names of the organisms that are fighting for the same food source, right? The role of those organisms in the food web, and by role we mean like producer, consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer. That's what we mean by that. So that's the role. And then what would happen if that food source population decreased? Meaning, okay, there you list two different organisms and they are competing for a food source, right? What would happen if that food source started to decrease? Okay. So you're talking about what are they fighting over? What if that went away? What if that started to decrease? What would happen? Okay. So hopefully that helps. And then this is the last one. Okay. So this guy on the very end, I think some of you guys tried to take a picture of it yourself last week with me. But here you go. So this guy on the very end, you have a huge variety of organisms. And then you even have a list of food chains in the food web. Okay. I would say it depends on how much time you have left in the week, but I would say try to connect them. So if you're going to start off and show a food chain of sorts, right? If you're going to say, okay, so what could eat the grass? We're going to say that the grasshopper eats the grass. Okay. So if I draw an arrow to the grasshopper, what could eat the grasshopper? We're going to say that this bird eats a grasshopper. So I'm going to go to the bird. Toot. Okay. And what would eat this bird? I don't know. A bear. I don't think a bear would eat a bird. We're going to say maybe a fox. Okay. And then we're going to say the fox could possibly be eaten by a bear. I don't know. Okay. So see how that was like a bunch of arrows going from one to another to another? If I were you, just for the fun of it, I would do a few of those and see how many you get correct, right? Before you just rely on this list. This list actually shows you what eats what. So you don't have to know exactly, but it's kind of fun to see if you even know, right? Because they are tricky sometimes. So your whole goal is for every time you show a different food chain, right? You're going to use a different color arrow. Okay, a different color arrow. So, for example, if I wanted to do I don't even know. I'm going to just show you real quick. I'm going to say we're going to go from clover to rabbit to fox. Okay, clover to rabbit to fox. So I'm going to use blue. Okay, clover to the rabbit. Where's the rabbit? Oh my gosh, that's an ugly rabbit. Clover to rabbit to the fox, right? So here's the fox. Notice when I'm doing my arrows, right? I'm pointing, and at the end of this one, I drew my little directional arrow point, and then I also did it again over here, okay? Making it very obvious for each round, okay? So now we're going to go to seeds, mouse, snake, hawk. Seeds, mouse, snake, hawk, okay? So I'm going to pick a different color. Whee! Okay. Seeds. I guess that's what that is. Mouse. Mouse. Another arrow. Then to a snake. Another arrow. And then to a hawk. Is that supposed to be a hawk? It looks like a little brown pigeon. Okay. I guess this is the hawk, you guys. Doesn't look much like a hawk to me, but okay, there we go. So anyway, notice the arrows. It's very obvious which direction they're pointing, and it's very obvious that they are starting to cross over because I chose a different color. So just make sure you're doing that for all of your different arrows. Okay. I just happen to do that. You guys should be able to actually insert nice, straight, computer made arrows instead of drawing, but I'm good either way as long as it's not a total hot mess. Okay. And from there, you're going to be able to leave that, because then I have a scenario where we're going to roll the dice. And based on what number you roll, that is what's going to end up happening to your ecosystem. So something will be coming along, whether it's a human made or a nature made disaster. Basically, it's going to affect parts of your ecosystem, and so you're going to have to determine which colors, which links are going to end up being erased, and what that actually means for your ecosystem. So that's kind of the last little bit that we will be using to apply our knowledge of how everything's connected. Okay, so for right now, if you get to this stage, your main point is just to make sure that you go through and you connect all of these as separate colors, right? So for each one, you're going to choose a different color. And so, I mean, obviously, you're going to get kind of creative, right? Light blue, dark blue, bright green, dark green, all of that stuff. And then you wait from there. Okie dokie. Let me know if you guys have any questions. I think that is it.